This week at Bungie, we've got a brand new set of Trials Labs information to cover, some additional Bungie bounties heading your way, and a whole list of weapon sandbox changes to go over. What's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link, and today is Thursday, November 11th, 2021. 11/11/21, by the way. Happy Veterans Day as we dive into this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into the meat of the conversation. Trials Labs and sandbox changes. We'll start with the Trials Labs stuff. Here's what Bungie had to say. This week, we're revisiting Trials Labs with Capture Zone. A quick reminder, Capture Zone is still basically elimination with the following changes. 30 seconds after the round starts, a capture zone is enabled. Players can capture this zone to win the round, or just eliminate the other team like normal. The capture zone has a waypoint from the round start, including a countdown timer, so everyone will know exactly when and where it will be. The capture zone starts in the middle of the map in the first round, and will change location each round. We took feedback from the previous Capture Zone lab, and made the following changes this time. We're using a stronger Trials map, Endless Veil. I like that. Rather than rotating through points that give one team a significant location advantage, we are rotating through 3 neutral zones, one at Temple, one at Mid, and one at Shrine. Players no longer get any super energy when capturing a zone either before or after the round starts. As we mentioned last week, card-based matchmaking is on all weekend, with the Flawless Pool turning on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And as with the previous 2 labs, a 2x Trials rank booster will be on all weekend. Going forward, we are looking at adding in-match rewards prior to getting a 7-win card, making it more worthwhile to play in the Flawless Pool and for increasing reputation gain, especially in the later ranks. We are still firming up plans, so expect more information on rewards in December. So very interesting stuff there. I'm kind of glad to see the return of Capture Zone for Trials. I thought it was an interesting enough game mode that had some real potential that was kind of ruined by the fact that doing poorly in the game mode gave you an advantageous spot. It kind of just dragged things out way longer than it needed to be. So I'm happy to see these new changes, looking forward to trying them out tomorrow. But after that, we get some news about incoming sandbox changes that are going to be tying in with the 30th anniversary. Which, of course, is going to bring a bunch of new content to the game, a new dungeon to dive through, and weapons from all throughout Bungie's history as a game developer. But for right now, we've got some major sandbox updates to go through, so let's go ahead and dive on in. First things, shotguns. In Season 11, Bungie wanted to see if slugs could be viable in PvE with a high enough reward for the risk of being close and the time it takes to aim at the head. Good news, they're viable. However, they currently outclass pellet shotguns and many other special ammo options, not to mention being a part of a dominant boss melting tactic, the whole hot swapping thing. We'd like to equalize this out a bit. However, since pellet shotguns are easier to use than slug shotguns, they don't need as large a bump. So here's what they're doing. They've reduced slug shotgun PvE damage bonus from the 30% that it got down to 20%. And they gave pellet shotguns a 10% PvE damage bonus. So they're pulling back on the damage of slug shotties just a little bit there, just a 10% drop. And they're giving other shotgun archetypes a 10% buff to kind of help them catch up as well. Next up, linear fusion rifles. In Season 14, we bumped these up, but believe that while their potential damage output competes numerically, and they're extra hot right now because of that sweet particle deconstruction artifact mod, they can't compete with the ease of use of other damage options. Last time they got a precision damage buff. This time it's a flat damage buff, and they're getting a flat damage increase of 10% in PvE. I'll take it for linear fusions. Next up, caster swords. We shipped this with a high heavy attack ammo cost to offset a great melee weapon that also has a good ranged attack, but now believe it's safe to reduce the ammo cost. And so they've reduced the heavy attack ammo cost on caster frame swords from 8 down to 5. Then we get to see some changes for bows. In Season 11, we bumped bow damage up 10% versus rank and file enemies. Having seen this in-game for a few seasons, it seems safe to nudge them up again. So they've increased damage versus rank and file enemies by another 10%. I mean, Le Monarch and Trinity Ghoul are already monstrously powerful in PvE. Seeing those weapons get a 10% damage buff against the weakest of enemies, I'm perfectly fine with it. Definitely interesting stuff. After that, we learn about some changes coming to sidearms and fusion rifles. Due to an ancient data entry error, sidearms and fusion rifle projectiles were non-hit scan. Behind the scene, the engine does math converting a projectile from non-hit scan to hit scan if it would cover a specific distance in one frame. So this would only occur running at 60 frames or higher. Shout out to a specific community that provided us with evidence on this issue. Yes, you know who you are. We got to see a lot of that in the last couple of weeks. So, they've increased sidearm and fusion rifle projectile speed from 999 to 9,999, which essentially makes them hit scan regardless of frame rate. Glad we could get that worked out. I wonder if that has to do with some of the issues that Jotun used to have to deal with back in the day. But alright, next up we learned about some exotic changes that are coming. Really excited about this. First, we knew Vex Mythoclast was going to be seeing a bit of a nerf. Well, today we're learning what those nerfs are. Thankfully, it's nothing too extreme. They've reduced the aim assist stat by 25 and reduced the linear fusion rifle mode aim assist cone scaler from 1.1 down to 1.05, and it now requires 3 eliminations for full overcharge instead of 2. So, they're not nerfing the damage on it, they're mostly just knocking down the aim assist on this weapon. I think that's more than a fair enough change for just how universally good Vex Mythoclast is. After that, we've got the Fighting Lion, which they go on to note that a full nerf for this weapon absolutely isn't needed, so they're just going to be doing a little bit of adjusting here. They've removed the multi-hit requirement on its special ability. For example, dealing any damage will now grant its buff. And they've increased the buff to the reload stat from plus 50 to plus 70. They give an example, reload will still be slow if you miss, but if you land any damage, Fighting Lion will reload faster than it did before the nerf. And they've increased the buff duration to 7 seconds. Really happy to hear about all of these changes. Fighting Lion's been an interesting weapon for a long time, and giving a buff to the reload there and its special perk, I'll take it. After that, Arbalest. Bungie states that they always wanted this to have high utility in heavily difficult PvE activities, but its lack of champion mods prevented that, and it's all about shield breaking already, so they're fixing that. It now has intrinsic anti-barrier. Thank you, Bungie. This is exactly what that weapon needed. Surprised to see that there's no other change for it in PvP though. Anyways, moving on, we've got Sleeper Simulant. The delta between Sleeper and the best legendary linear fusion rifle wasn't large enough to make this a compelling option, so while it benefits from the 10% damage buff that they've already mentioned, they're giving it some additional love. They've increased the magazine size from 3 to 4 and increased the PvE damage by an additional 6%. Hopefully this will make Sleeper a more viable option for big damage in PvE like it used to be back in the day. Next up, Suros Regime. Dual mode receiver always made Suros a worse 360 RPM auto rifle, but fixing that is a straightforward stat bump. This may not make this mode dominant, but at least makes it do what was intended, turn it into a high impact auto rifle. So here's the change they've made. Dual mode receiver now grants the following in addition to its current effects: plus 30 range and plus 3 zoom. Wow, that's a huge increase to range there, and I'd imagine that's probably going to affect the weapon's aim assist as well. Anything to make the Suros Regime a more viable weapon is fine by me though. After that, we've got the Cryothesia 77K, which Bungie states that they deliberately shipped in a weakened state, mostly due to the state of Crucible at the start of Season 14, and so they're going to be taking the reins off of it a bit. They've removed the variable trigger completely. It now fires on trigger press instead of release. This will make it feel much more responsive. Charged shot has been moved to special reload, and getting a final blow with the sidearm will enable access to the special reload. Once the charged shot is fired, the weapon will revert back to its standard sidearm mode. And this does not cost your entire magazine. Nice to hear that change. And finally, the charged shot will now cause an AoE which can freeze AI and slow players. Direct hits will still freeze everything though. Good changes there for the Cryothesia. It was definitely a weapon that was in need of some love, shall we say. After that, another weapon that's definitely been in need of some love, Leviathan's Breath. This bow is super underused, so we wanted to give it a bump while also making its catalyst more interesting. And they state that you should expect this type of catalyst tweak to become more common moving forward. Ooh, that sounds kind of interesting. Anyways, the catalyst now grants the Archer's Tempo perk in addition to its other effects. I think it's a perfect perk to add on to the Leviathan's Breath, so that it doesn't take 7 years to fully draw that thing. Nice change. After that, Whisper of the Worm. The original DPS king has fallen out of favor. with the delay before the damage buff kicking in, making the weapon less usable in short damage phases, and optimal sustained damage requiring all critical hits, but not sufficiently rewarding precision. And so, here's the changes they've made to Whisper. They've reduced the delay on activating whispered breathing from the catalyst from 2.1 seconds to 1.2 seconds. Pretty good change there. White nail magazine refill has been changed as well. It was 3 from the inventory, but now pulls 2 from the inventory and 1 from thin air. So you don't have infinite ammo with Whisper anymore, but it does kind of manifest a single round now out of thin air. Finally, they've increased the damage in PvE by 10%. Listen, Whisper has needed some major buffs for a long time. I'm happy to see any changes here. Hopefully they pan out well and it makes a return to normal loadouts. After that, Darcy. This sniper rifle's damage has fallen behind as other options have been buffed, and its damage is dependent on crits while also requiring 100% time on target, so we've improved its ease of use and bumped the damage up. They've reduced the flinch, recoil, and accuracy degradation by 50% while Personal Assistant is active, and Personal Assistant now has a 1-second delay before deactivating when off target. It used to be instantaneous, and they've increased its damage in PvE by a whopping 20%. Hopefully that'll all make it a more worthwhile option in PvE. I can't think of the last time I actually used Darcy. Then, speaking of weapons I don't use very often, well, outside of hunters right now, Malfeasance. They've increased the explosion damage on this hand cannon by 50%. Crazy change there. Cannot wait to try that out. After that, Dead Man's Tale. Yet another exotic that people were probably hoping to see nerfed. Here's what Bungie's going to be changing with it. They've actually spent some time here tuning it so that it's going to benefit controller players much more than mouse and keyboard players. They've increased the reticle friction fall-off distance, no effect on mouse and keyboard. They've given it less recoil, reduced effect on mouse and keyboard, and they've improved its overall accuracy with a reduced effect for mouse and keyboard users. Interesting stuff there, all to make the gun a bit more easy to use for those who play the game with controllers. After that, we've got the Heir Apparent Catalyst. There was a data entry error in the Heir Apparent Catalyst, resulting in it granting too much damage resistance against players. This has now been corrected. There is no effect in PvE. They've reduced the damage resistance against players from 75% to 25%. I've actually seen and used that in PvP before. The amount of damage you could soak up while having that shield going was actually kind of ludicrous. I can understand the change. Next up, the Lorentz Driver. The bonus ability energy feels extraneous when the damage buff is so strong, and we're limiting certain weapon sources of ability energy. So, they've removed ability energy regeneration on picking up a telemetry. Again, kind of surprising that that's the only change that they're announcing for Lorentz Driver. After that, we've got Traveler's Chosen. The ability energy granted from the perk was on a curve that isn't intuitively understood. Similar to Lorentz Driver, it seemed appropriate to adjust this in PvP. These changes aren't noticeable in PvE. It now grants 10% ability energy per stack on activation, was previously more generous on low stacks and less generous on high stacks. The average and amount for 10 stacks is going to be unchanged, and they've reduced the stacks granted on a Guardian defeat from 3 down to 2, so you're going to be building those stacks a little bit slower in PvP now. But alright, there we go. That's it for all of the exotic changes. Next up, we've got some changes coming to some perks, starting with Adrenaline Junkie. Been waiting to hear about this one. This perk wasn't performing as well as intended, and the path of least resistance was making it live up to its dev name. Grenade Buckler, by the way. Eliminations with weapons can add a single damage stack or extend existing ones. Grenade eliminations boost the stacks immediately to ×5, and they've lowered the duration to compensate for weapon activation. So, you can get a kill with a weapon to build your stack up by 1, or you can get a kill with a grenade to immediately jump to ×5. I dig it. Next up, Vorpal Weapon. A perk that grants 15% damage against all targets I'm going to use my heavy weapon on. This was of course a non-choice and sucked the air out of the room for other damage perks. At the same time, it was failing its original role, giving players a reason to run primary against tough targets. So here's what Bungie's doing with it. It was a 15% damage boost on all weapons. Now it's a 10% damage boost on heavy weapons, 15% on special weapons, and 20% on primary. No change to damage versus players in their super. This is a really interesting change. It's one of those ones where Bungie was implementing it because like they said here, too many people were just running Vorpal on their heavies and all that kind of stuff. But rather than just nerf the perk unilaterally, they nerf it a bit for heavy weapons. They knock down 5% on heavy weapons. They leave it the same on special weapons, and they give you an extra 5% damage on primaries. I like it. I like this. If you're going to nerf a popular perk, this is the way you do it. It's still going to be completely viable across the board. Alright, next up, Whirlwind Blade. This was too obviously the best sword damage perk around, so while we're fine with it being good at sustained damage, we've pulled back on it for shorter fights. They've increased the number of stacks needed to hit maximum damage from ×5 to ×10. I actually think that's a fine change. That's probably not going to affect things too much. Next up, Pulse Monitor. What if instead of activating on what feels like a fail state, this activated on a state you'll be in almost every encounter, even if you're winning? So, they've changed the threshold for activation from 90% health to 30% shield, i.e. this now requires much less damage to trigger. So rather than waiting until you're almost dead to get the benefits of Pulse Monitor, it'll just be when your shield is almost gone, which happens all the time in Destiny. I'm definitely okay. That's a major buff for Pulse Monitor. Alright, after that we've got some changes to mods, starting with Quick Access Sling. The usage on this mod is very telling. It's exclusively used on bows and breach grenade launchers, and barely used at all on other weapons. At the same time, we've pulled down some options players had for improving their swap speed, and wanted to make an option available for building towards that on all legendary weapons. And so, here's the changes that they're going to be making. Quick Access Sling used to give you plus 100 handling and 0.9 times ready, stow, and aim down sight times for 0.4 seconds after running out of ammo. Now it's going to be 0.9 times that ready and stow time all of the time. It's going to be active all the time. This change also applies to the Swap Mag perk, as they use the same perk behind the scenes. So it looks like they're taking away the handling, but they're making it so that other buff you get is active basically all the time with this mod. Interesting change. Going to actually have to test that out. Then we've got a bit of a quality of life change with a full auto retrofit. We've seen plenty of requests for an accessibility option allowing full auto fire, particularly on fast-firing semi-automatic weapons. We have a settings option in the works for a season after the Witch Queen launches, but decided to put in a stopgap to help players until we're able to ship it. And of course, please keep these types of suggestions coming. So, they've added a full auto retrofit weapon mod that enables full auto while the trigger is held. Usable on legendary hand cannons, sidearms, scout rifles, and pulse rifles. And this is going to be unlocked by default for all players. So kind of like the catalyst for the Vigilance Wing does, where it makes it a fully automatic weapon. They're going to be adding that as a mod, a universal mod you can put on any semi-automatic legendary weapon in the game. Interesting change. I like it. After that, we've got a final section here talking a bit about the future. Annual expansions are a good time for system level changes, since they get so much more playtest time over a longer duration compared to a normal season. We don't like that the desire for exotic catalysts is largely driven by the orbs of power generation they provide, and have something in the works to let players build around that limitation. Weapon differentiation. If I have 2 Void adaptive hand cannons, one from the Suros Foundry and one from the latest raid, why do I care more about one than the other? The stats tend to be fairly close. Perk pools can be different, but there are so many perks that it's a stretch to say the perk pool gives the weapon its identity. We've got something shipping on all new and reissued weapons in the Witch Queen that addresses this issue directly and are working to expand the same solution to all weapons that drop in the future. Interesting stuff. They go on to state that they've mentioned in the last patch notes that they're not done with the special ammo economy in PvP, and have a further tweak coming that should help bring down the amount of ammo floating around. Exotic primary weapons already advance ammo finder mods much faster, but we want them to feel better in hard PvE content and are adjusting all of them to reach this goal. They finish this up by saying that we are adjusting some exotics, some that consistently top the PvP usage charts in an oppressive way, some that have had their perks limited to a degree that's no longer warranted. They're looking at you, Chaperone. And hopefully we'll be learning a lot more about those changes sometime in the future. But alright, there we go, Guardians. That's pretty much it for the biggest bits of news contained in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly Blog this week at Bungie. Major sandbox changes there. Really happy to hear about a lot of those. Psyched about some of the exotic buffs that are coming. I cannot wait to whip out the Whisper of the Worm and see how that baby handles after these changes go into effect. We do have continuing Bungie bounties going. The next date is November 15th. followed by another Bungie Bounty date on the 20th. I'll have that schedule up on the screen here for you to see. Make sure you participate. Remember, if you match up with or up against any of the people who are available for Bungie Bounties on those particular days during that time frame, if you win a game against them or with them on your team, you're going to get access to a special emblem. Make sure you're playing during those times. But alright, Guardians, that's it for the news, and those are my thoughts. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. There's a lot of sandbox changes we covered in this. Hopefully there's some things in there that you guys enjoyed. We're out for now. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. And as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.